How were my first years here in the Philippines? When I thought about leaving Germany in the early 2000s and to emigrate to a nicer country, I began to travel around and to look for a country where I wanted to grow old. From my travels back then, I have lots of photos, but unfortunately only a very few videos. The few old videos that do exist you can see here on my English spoken YouTube channel. But a few years after I emigrated to the Philippines, end of 2013, I made a very personal Christmas gift for my mother, whom I only had phone contact for years. I created a photo book for her to give her insights into my early travels to the Philippines and the years since my emigration. And since I still have the digital copy of the photo book on my hard drive, I can also take you on a journey back, my first trips to the Philippines and my early days here in Cebu City. My first day as an emigrant. Just yesterday I had landed and the hotel was booked only for 7 days. You see me here having breakfast. Because I'm sure I'll find an apartment in less than 7 days. I've always been an adventurer. I did not want to completely abandon the Western lifestyle right away, but wanted to settle in peacefully. So I looked for a condo, and indeed I was lucky to find a roughly 40 square meter 2-bedroom condo in the center of Cebu City. The complex is called One Oasis Cebu and is located in the Mabolo district. But of course I also had to explain to my mother where Cebu City is located in the world. A large panoramic picture gives a good visual impression of the landscape, plus small maps showing where the Philippines are located in the world. And by the way, all the photos you will see were taken by me back then with my Canon DSLR camera. One Oasis Cebu back then consisted of just 4 multi-story buildings and 2 large swimming pools. My apartment was relatively small by European standards, a tiny bathroom with a shower, 2 small rooms about 15 and 12 square meters each, and the roughly 20 square meter living dining room. Quite compact, but hey, it was fully furnished and I could immediately start my new life for just 25,000 peso. It was more likely a student's apartment, a small kitchenette and the living area, well, it was kind of a multi-purpose room. The washing machine was in the living room. It was enough to settle in and sure, first alone, then for 2. But as soon as relatives visited and they stayed overnight, I quickly realized just 1 toilet is definitely not enough, because here you easily have 6-7 people in the apartment. Over time it simply became too cramped, and when my lease ended after a year, I knew I wanted something bigger. But one reason why many people move into condos is also the pool. When I moved in, it was brand new, and even on weekends I often had it all to myself, a real luxury. But over the course of my year there, more and more people moved in, and additional buildings were constructed in the complex. In conclusion, at the end of my year there, you just couldn't use the pool on weekends anymore. It was packed and noisy during the day. So note, condo complexes are great at the beginning until they start bursting at the seams. After settling in here for a few months, I decided to convert my German driver's license. The German consul in Cebu City provided the certified translation, and then I was off to the races. I bought a lightly used Honda CR-V for the equivalent of 6,000 euro. What I hadn't anticipated though was that the car was a real gas guzzler, especially in city traffic. But back then gasoline here costed around 35 peso per liter, so I could manage that for the time being. After 1 year in the small condo, we moved to a good 60 square meter townhouse on 2 floors in a quiet and simple residential area just outside the center of Cebu. Here moving is called lipat bahay and is usually done by locals with the small multicabs. It's quick and affordable as long as you don't have much furniture. Back then I didn't have many pieces of furniture of my own, so I had to buy everything new, a refrigerator, TV and so on. And then you see how the new place gradually took on its own character. Overall it offered significantly more space, and all in all my often second-hand furnitures and appliances costed an additional 5,000 euro. But as history repeats itself, over time with more furniture and acquisitions, the space in the townhouse became too small, and even after 2 years in the Philippines I was still a bit too accustomed to German standards, used to large rooms and such. In Germany I had lived alone in a 65 square meter space for the last 5 years. So the thought occurred, time for something bigger. We then moved to Lahuk, another district of Cebu, into a house with 4 rooms and about 100 square meters. That was a whole different world, as it cost 28,000 peso, double of what the small townhouse had cost. And after 2 years I also sold the gas guzzler, because living in the city with a consumption of 20 to 25 liters just became too much. I decided to get a new car. I chose a Mitsubishi Montero Sport diesel. It consumed a maximum of 15 liters in the city traffic, making it much cheaper for city life. And in the new house there was enough space, a proper bedroom, space for an office, and I could even set up a small gym. There was also room for laundry, and up the hill in Lahuk the air was simply better. But let me digress a bit and show you how my ex-girlfriend lived here before we met. You see her half-brother, and she herself is standing in her old room, surrounded by furniture. That was her world. Cooking is done outside on an open flame, very traditional. You can see everything is kept very simple and, to be honest, quite dirty. But how can one maintain cleanliness in such an environment? This leads me to a point you might want to think about. When you go to a 5-star hotel in the Philippines and find it not as spotless as you expect, then take a look at these pictures. They show how the employees, the maids who are supposed to keep your room clean, grow up and live. And you understand what cleanliness means to them. Then you can surely comprehend that our notions of cleanliness are as unfamiliar and alien to a Filipino as the thought world of an extraterrestrial would be to us. But back to the Philippines. With my ex-girlfriend we often visited her relatives, aunt and uncle, in Panglao. They partly lived in a real tree house. You can't see the tree here, it's better inferred from the front side. This house was over 100 years old, and 3 generations of the family had lived in it. And my ex-girlfriend grew up there as a child with her relatives. She was raised in this tree house, but right next to it you can already see a new building. The family needed more space as their own 5 children grew. Years later I financed the kitchen extension, which is now on the wall you're looking at here. And in retrospect, my help was necessary, because at the end of 2021, Typhoon Odette devastated the Visayas. The old treehouse, which had withstood all storms for over a century, sadly did not survive Super Typhoon Odette. Here's the new building and the old house from the front. The tree supports the roof from the inside. The laundry area and the toilet are clearly visible, and also how I freshen up outside in nature in the mornings. Yes, life in the countryside does have its own charm, being so far from civilization. The house was about 200 meters away from the road. You couldn't just get there by car, it was truly rural. And again, the squatter area where my ex-girlfriend lived, that no longer exists. Everything was demolished because the owner wanted to build on the land himself. And on the following double page I offer an insight into Filipino culture. When the Spaniards arrived in the Philippines in 1521, they used pork to diminish the influence of non-Catholic religions. The Philippines already had pork dishes, but nothing comparable to a whole pig grilled over charcoal. Over the centuries, this Lechon culture, especially in the Visayas, was perfected, and some Filipinos argue today that lechon, instead of the more ubiquitous adobo, should be declared the national dish. Therefore, especially in the countryside, it's completely normal for families to raise their own pigs, and even children are involved when the pig with which they have grown up is slaughtered. For Europeans unfamiliar with this life, it sounds harsh, but it is the life and culture of the Philippines, and people understand it as the natural cycle of life and death. Here I see where my food comes from, what work and life are behind it, and that's why I'm showing you these photos. I want to show you what life and culture are like in the Philippines, even if it's different from what you know. But back to the everyday life of an expat. You might wonder what expats do in their free time. Well, I started practicing karate again here, and also the Filipino martial art, arnis. In Germany I had practiced karate for several years during my university days, but had to stop due to work commitments. Here I got the opportunity to pick it up again. There are lots of martial arts clubs here for all kind of martial arts, taekwondo, karate, muay thai, whatever you're looking for. The biggest difference from training in Germany, here it happens in over 70 degrees Celsius in the shade. A Dutchman tried to set up a mini golf course at the Park Mall in Banaue before COVID, but that didn't work out, probably also due to COVID. You know what else you can do here? Go shooting. After all, we're in the American-influenced Philippines, and there are several public shooting ranges here. But for your information, possession of any kind of weapon is strictly forbidden for foreigners. And for a few years now you can practice archery at SMC site, and bowling is also an option. There's no shortage of gyms here where you can work out. The prices, they range from a few pesos a day to several thousand a month. I'll definitely make a separate video about that in the future. But now I'll go back further in time, because before I finally emigrated to the Philippines, I took several trips across the country to get to know the land and its people. Legaspi, for example, is a fantastically beautiful area around Mount Mayon. At the night market there you can get a lot of delicious vegetable dishes, which is quite a change, especially when you're used to the prevalence of meat everywhere else here. Back then I traveled around just like a normal tourist, or rather like a local. Overland buses, the transport boats called bangka, just as people do it in the provinces of the Philippines. I was far from tourism in Camarines in a very simple beach resort. It's beautiful like paradise there, and the area is completely untouched by tourism. On the beach of Camarines I only met 2 other American backpackers. In this region, which easily covers 100 to 200 square kilometers, there were maybe 10 or 20 foreigners at that time. This also means that the nature there is really still original, like from a picture book. And sometimes I felt like a Spaniard in the 16th century, setting foot on new ground for the first time. That's how untouched everything is there. If you like islands, sandbanks and sandy beaches, then there's more than enough to discover in Camarines. And the sandbank you see in this picture stretches about a kilometer in every direction. And only then it's time for do-it-yourself, swimming and climbing. And yes, I swim in full gear. When I asked my companion, I have to swim through this pond, won't everything get wet? He just laughed and said, so what, you're in the Philippines, in 10 minutes everything will be dry again. And he was right. The further excursions to Banaue and Sagada, however, turned out to be quite rainy. Whoever thinks there's only sunshine in the Philippines will quickly learn otherwise in the Cordilleras. Umbrellas and ponchos are essential gear here. The architecture of the rice terraces, the houses of the native mountain tribes, it's truly impressive. In the early 2010s I took thousands of photos, and today I regret not making more videos. Back then the idea of becoming a YouTuber just didn't occur to me. Today, however, it's a reason to travel all over again in the coming years. A very important note for anyone planning to travel to the northern Philippines, to the Cordilleras: bring sweaters, socks and warm clothing. Because the climate up there is like the German mid-range mountains, with daytime temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius, and it can drop to around 10 degrees at night or when it rains. However, heating systems are unknown in the hotels there, so it gets really cold at night. Thankfully, you can get extra wool blankets, yes, really, at the reception. And you will need them, guaranteed. So if you come from the lowlands, where it's over 30 degrees hot and only have light clothes with you, you'll quickly catch a cold and feel very chilly up there. But now just enjoy the beautiful nature. And as I said, if you like cooler weather, then Luzon might just be right for you. In the mountains you don't have the tropical hot climate, but rather a climate similar to the German mid-range mountains. And a word of caution: what looks so picturesque from the left, the road winding along the mountains, is quite different from the German mid-range mountains. Here it doesn't go straight for 50 meters. And after 3 days of driving through the Cordillera, you're glad to be back in the lowlands, where you can drive straight for longer distances. And of course a detour to Sagada was a must, as well as to the highest point of the Cordillera, 2,255 meters above sea level. Of course I also made a detour to 100 islands, but to be honest it wasn't exactly the highlight, because the tours there are all preset. You follow a fixed route and can only take a quick dip in the water at 2 or 3 stops. Visiting 100 islands once is a good experience, but it's not necessarily a place you need to go back to multiple times. However, the trip to the crater of Mount Pinatubo is a completely different story. I find the tour starting from Tarlac, which I also took, to be the most recommendable. You start around 5 AM at the Mount Pinatubo registration office and drive for about 2 hours in a 4-wheel jeep through the Laha moonscape. Then around 7 AM you climb the approximately 6 to 7 kilometers to the crater of Mount Pinatubo, but it's doable for the average tourist. And when you arrive at the crater around 10 a.m., you're glad it's finally getting warmer, because you're at an altitude of about 1,400 meters and it's about 14 degrees cooler than in the plains. Up there you can have something to eat, rest, and after 1 or 2 hours head all the way back. If you're wondering whether you can swim in the crater lake, officially swimming is prohibited. The water temperature has almost reached ambient temperature by now, but the acidity level, for example, is still too high to support fish or other aquatic life. During my visit, however, a group of Russian tourists were not deterred by this and swam in the lake. And if you think, why should I get up so early? There are tours starting at 10 a.m. too. It's simple. Descending from the crater to the plains, it became clear to me why. Seeing the sweating tourists coming up. Getting up early beats sleeping in, because those who start at 10 a.m. or later make the climb in the brutal midday heat. And then another site you should visit, unfortunately without own pictures, but with an important tip. The day after Pinatubo, my journey continued to the Taal Volcano. Arriving there, looking up to the crater rim, I thought to myself, if I climbed to the summit of Pinatubo in 2 hours yesterday, what are these perhaps 500 meters of steep ascent to the crater rim of Taal? In my youthful folly back then I thought, why do I need a horse, which the locals offer for the climb, just to climb these 500 meters? So I went up on foot. It also only takes about 30-40 minutes. But it's uphill, steeply uphill, and honestly I wouldn't do it again. The path is really very steep and very dusty. So if you're over 50 and a local at Taal offers you a horse for the way to the crater rim, take it. And Boracay was also on my bucket list, but to be honest, it's so overrun with tourists, it was just awful. Remember, I came from Camarines, paradise, and compared to that, Boracay is just terrible. And now again we jump a few years forward to me being an expat. Of course I do all the things tourists do. Visits to all the malls and lots of selfies. There are also a number of water parks here where you can have great fun. Here are some impressions from the ones I've visited over the past few years. At the Temple of Lea, every time I'm there the interior is closed and I can't visit the exhibitions inside. One of my goals is to get inside to film and make better videos. Then there's the folklore. It's quite amusing. People slip out of their everyday clothes into traditional garb and act as they are back in time. But it's definitely fun to participate in this river cruise in Lombok. There are also plenty of waterfalls, and then there's the Danasan Eco Park, for which I unfortunately don't have any videos yet. The same as for the adjacent zoo. These are projects I want to tackle in the next 2 or 3 years for my YouTube channel. You see, there's a lot of variety here, and much of it is still not really explored by tourists. I hope you liked the photo book and my explanations, so at least leave a like. And until next time, bye bye!